At my mother's memorial, my father squeezed my shoulder and told the room I had a simple heart, his polite code for stupid. For 33 years, Grant Morris made me feel small so he could feel big. He assumed my lack of a prestigious degree meant I couldn't read a ledger or spot a lie. He was wrong. By the time I took the microphone at his precious gala, I wasn't just the disappointment he tried to hide. I was the one holding the evidence that could ruin him. The drive back to Briar Glen always felt like a regression, as if the miles on the highway were actually stripping away years of my life. By the time I passed the limestone pillars that marked the entrance to the town, I did not feel like a 33-year-old woman who paid her own rent and managed a used bookstore. I felt like the 12-year-old girl who could never quite get her math homework right, the one who stained her dress before the photo, the one who was, in the words of my father, a project that never quite broke even. My mother, Elena, had been dead for 6 days. It was a sudden aneurysm that took her while she was gardening. A quiet exit for a woman who lived a quiet life. I had spent those 6 days in a fog of logistics and grief, handling the transport of her body and the printing of the programs. Mostly because my father, Grant Morris, was too busy managing the optics of his bereavement to handle the details of it. When I pulled my 10-year-old sedan into the circular driveway of the Morris estate, the house looked immaculate. The hedges were trimmed into sharp, geometric lines. The brick facade had been recently power washed. There was no sign that a woman who loved chaotic wildflowers and mismatched patio furniture had ever lived here. Grant was waiting at the front door. He checked his watch as I stepped out of the car. "You are late," he said. He did not hug me. He offered a cheek, cool and smelling of expensive aftershave, and then pulled back to inspect my outfit. I hit traffic on the interstate. I said. Grant smoothed the lapel of his charcoal suit. "Successful people anticipate traffic. Haley, they leave buffers, but I suppose you are doing your best." It was his favorite refrain. "You are doing your best." It sounded like a compliment to strangers, but to me, it was a precise measurement of my limitations. He turned and walked into the house, expecting me to follow with my bags. He did not offer to carry them. The memorial service was held the next afternoon at the Briar Glen Community Center, a building my father had largely funded. The room was filled with people who mattered in the county, politicians, developers, and the wealthy donors who kept my father's nonprofit, the Harrowell Learning Trust, flush with cash. They wore black cashmere and spoke in hushed, reverent tones about my father's resilience. I sat in the front row, staring at the urn. It was tasteful and modern, chosen by Grant's assistant. My mother had wanted her ashes scattered in the ocean, but Grant had decided that was too messy, too transient. He needed a monument. When Grant took the podium, the room went silent. He was a magnificent speaker. He knew exactly when to pause, when to let his voice crack with curated emotion, and when to look up at the ceiling as if seeking strength. He spoke about my mother's loyalty, her grace as a hostess, and her unwavering support of his vision. He painted her as a silent partner in his great empire of education and philanthropy. And then his eyes landed on me. "Elena's greatest joy was her family," Grant said, his voice dropping to a tender, pitying register, "especially our daughter, Haley. Elena worried so much about Haley. She spent her life protecting Haley from the sharper edges of the world. Our daughter has such a simple heart. She never had a head for business or the complexities of our work. But Elena loved her for that simplicity. She loved her just as she was." The words hit me like a physical blow. A simple heart. It was a masterful insult. Disguised as paternal affection, he had just told 300 of the most influential people in Massachusetts that I was simple-minded, fragile, and unworthy of the Morris legacy, all while sounding like a loving father. The audience murmured a collective, sympathetic awe. They looked at me with soft, pitying eyes. I forced myself to sit up straight, digging my fingernails into my palms until the skin broke. I would not cry. I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. After the service, the house was filled with caterers and close associates. I escaped to my father's study, needing a moment of silence. Grant found me there 10 minutes later. He closed the heavy oak door, and the mask of the grieving widower vanished, replaced by the cold, assessing stare I knew so well. "You looked slouched in the front row," he said, pouring himself a scotch. It looked ungrateful. I did not realize grief had a posture requirement. I said, "Everything has a requirement. Haley, that is what you have never understood." He took a sip of his drink and sat behind his massive desk. The desk was a fortress of mahogany, covered in stacks of files regarding the Harrowell Learning Trust. "Your mother babied you," he said, his voice flat. "She softened the world for you because she knew you could not handle the reality of it. But she is gone now, and I am not going to carry you the way she did. I have a job." "Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "I pay my own bills. I do not need you to carry me. You manage a used bookstore." He corrected. "You earn in a year what I spend on landscaping. That is not a career. That is a hobby for people who lack ambition. You are going to have to earn your place in this family now. Haley, no more hiding behind your mother's skirts." I left the study before I said something that would make him evict me before the funeral flowers had even wilted. I needed to sleep. I needed to be in my old room, the one place in this house that had ever felt safe. But when I opened the door to my childhood bedroom, I stopped cold. The room was different. The walls, which had been a soft lavender since I was 16, were now a stark, clinical white. My bulletin board, once covered in photos and ribbons from the few creative writing contests I had placed in, was gone. The bookshelf was empty. I walked down the hall to my mother's home office. It was a small sunroom off the master suite, where she used to handle the household accounts and write her thank you notes. It was empty. Her desk was cleared off. The drawers were open and bare. The filing cabinet was gone. I turned to the closet where she kept her personal files. Medical records, tax returns, the old family albums. The door, which had always been kept shut with a simple latch, now sported a brand new electronic keypad lock with a glowing red light. My heart hammered against my ribs. She had been dead less than a week. Why had he erased her so quickly? I went downstairs to the kitchen, looking for water. The house was finally quiet. The caterers and guests had gone. The kitchen was dark, illuminated only by the light over the stove. Mrs. Gable, the household manager who had been with us since I was 10, was standing by the sink, drying a crystal glass. She jumped when I entered. "Haley," she said, her hand going to her chest. "I did not hear you come down. I am sorry. Mrs. Gable, I just wanted some water." She looked at me, her face tight with a mixture of sorrow and anxiety. She put the glass down and wiped her hands on her apron. She glanced toward the hallway, checking to make sure we were alone. She walked over to me, her movements quick and nervous. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron and pulled out a plain white envelope. It was sealed. "Your mother gave me this 3 months ago." "Mrs. Gable whispered. "She made me promise. She said I was to give it to you only if she was gone. She said, specifically, if I am gone before Grant." I took the envelope. It felt light, but there was a hard object inside. "Why?" I asked. Mrs. Gable shook her head, backing away. "I do not know. She just said you would need it. Hide it. Haley, do not let him see it." She turned back to the sink and started scrubbing a pot with ferocious intensity, signaling that the conversation was over. I slipped the envelope into the waistband of my leggings and covered it with my oversized sweater. I went back upstairs, my thirst forgotten. Inside the safety of the bathroom, with the door locked and the shower running to mask any sound, I opened the envelope. Inside was a small silver key and a folded piece of stationery. I unfolded the paper. It was my mother's handwriting, loopy and elegant, but the letters looked rushed. "Trust what you notice. Unit 12, Briar Glen Self-Storage on Route 9. That was it. No I love you, no explanation, just a command and a location. Trust what you notice." I stared at the note. What had I noticed? I noticed the aggressive rebranding of her death. I noticed the locked closet. I noticed the way Grant looked at me, not with shared grief, but with the irritation of a man dealing with a loose end. I hid the key and the note inside the lining of my suitcase, buried beneath my socks. The next morning, the dynamic in the house shifted from mourning to business. Grant announced at breakfast that I would be joining him for a dinner with the board of directors of the Harrowell Learning Trust that evening. "I do not have anything to wear to a board dinner," I said, staring at my black coffee. Grant sighed, buttering his toast with precise, angry strokes. "I assumed as much. Celeste will take you shopping this afternoon." "Who is Celeste?" I asked. "My partner," he said, without looking up. The word hung in the air. Partner. My mother had been gone 6 days. But clearly, Celeste had been around much longer than that. Celeste Rourke was waiting for me in the foyer at noon. She was beautiful in a way that felt manufactured, perfectly highlighted blonde hair, skin that glowed from expensive treatments, and a smile that showed too many teeth. She was perhaps 40, only 7 years older than me. "Haley," she said, reaching out to touch my arm, "I am so sorry for your loss. Grant has told me so much about you. I bet he has." I said. She ignored my tone. "We are going to find you something stunning. Grant wants you to look capable tonight." The shopping trip was a blur of humiliation. Celeste rejected everything I picked out, steering me towards stiff, structural dresses that made me feel like a piece of corporate furniture. In the dressing room, she handed me a navy sheath dress. "Listen to me. Haley," she said, her voice dropping the cheerful veneer. "Your dad hates surprises. He is under a lot of pressure right now with the foundation. The best thing you can do is smile. Say thank you, and don't make your grief complicated. He does not have the patience for it." "Is that advice or a warning?" I asked. "It is kindness," she said, smoothing my hair. "Take it." The dinner was held in a private room at the Oak Room, the most expensive steakhouse in town. There were 12 people at the table, mostly older men in suits, with a few polished wives who looked like older versions of Celeste. Grant sat at the head of the table, holding court. He introduced me as his daughter, who is taking a break from her little bookshop to be with family. The conversation revolved around the trust. They spoke about educational impact, underserved communities, and legacy building. Grant was charismatic, passionate, and utterly convincing. I almost believed him myself. Then, during the salad course, a donor named Mr. Henderson turned to me. "So, Haley, do you have a background in education like your father? Are you involved in the trust's curriculum planning?" I froze. I had attended community college for 2 years before transferring to a state school to study literature, a degree I never finished because my funding, controlled by my father, mysteriously dried up during my senior year. "No," I said, "I leave the curriculum to the experts." Grant laughed, a loud, booming sound that made the table turn. "Haley is our creative soul," Grant announced, swirling his wine. "She tried college for a while, but the academic rigor wasn't quite her speed. She is living proof that you can donate buildings to a university, but you cannot donate intelligence to your children." The table erupted in laughter. It was a polite, wealthy laughter, but it cut me to the bone. Grant grinned at me, his eyes challenging me to react. "Take the joke," his look said. "Be the punchline. It is the only value you have here." I forced the corners of my mouth up. I took a sip of water. I let the humiliation settle in my stomach like a stone. Trust what you notice. I noticed that Celeste looked down at her plate. I noticed that one of the board members, a woman with gray hair, winced slightly. The next morning, I met Mara Klein, the estate attorney. Her office was in town, a small, dusty space that smelled of old paper. Mara was a sharp-featured woman in her 60s who had known my parents for decades. She looked tired. "Grant was supposed to be here," Mara said, shuffling papers on her desk, "but he called and said he was too busy saving the world to discuss probate. He does not like details." I said, "No, he does not." Mara agreed. She looked at me over her glasses. "Haley, your mother's will is specific. What does that mean?" It means she left the bulk of her personal assets, her jewelry, her separate savings, and her share of the family trust, to you. But she created a testamentary trust structure. It is not a simple direct inheritance. Why? To protect it, Mara said carefully, and to ensure you have control. Grant is furious about the complexity. He has been calling me every hour telling me to simplify it, to break the trust and roll the assets into the main marital estate. He says you are not competent to manage a trust. I am competent, I said, surprising myself. Mara nodded. I know you are, but the will requires you to take active steps to claim the role of trustee. If you do not step up, the default provision allows Grant to appoint a co-trustee, and he will appoint himself. I will step up, I said. Good, but be careful. Haley, Grant is used to getting his way. When he faces resistance, he does not negotiate. He bulldozes. That night, waiting until the house was asleep, I took my car keys. I told myself I just needed air. I drove out of the estate, down the winding roads, and onto Route 9. Briar Glen Self-Storage was a depressing row of corrugated metal buildings on the edge of town, illuminated by flickering orange streetlights. It was a place for people in transition, divorcees downsizing, students moving home, businesses failing. I found Unit 12. It was an outdoor unit with a rusty roll-up door. I looked around to make sure I was alone. The highway was empty. I inserted the small silver key into the padlock. It turned with a stiff click. I rolled the door up, the metal groaning in the silence. I used the flashlight on my phone to see inside. The unit was small, 5 feet by 5 feet. It smelled of dust and stale air. Stacked against the back wall were 6 white banker boxes. On top of them sat an old, heavy laptop from maybe 10 years ago and a prepaid flip phone in its plastic packaging. I stepped inside and pulled the door down halfway behind me. I opened the top box. It was full of receipts, thousands of them, and bank statements, and printed emails. I picked up a file folder labeled in my mother's handwriting. Harrowell/Ridgeway, 2023. I sat on the cold concrete floor and opened it. The pages were printouts of digital bank transfers. I saw the Harrowell Learning Trust logo at the top of the statements. I traced the lines with my finger. February 12th. $9,950 paid to Ridgeway Civic Solutions. February 19th. $9,950 paid to Ridgeway Civic Solutions. February 26th. $9,950 paid to Ridgeway Civic Solutions. The pattern repeated, week after week. Always the same amount, always just under $10,000. I knew enough from my days managing the bookstore's cash flow to know that $10,000 was the threshold for mandatory federal reporting. These payments were structured to avoid red flags. I had never heard of Ridgeway Civic Solutions. My father's charity was supposed to fund scholarships and after-school programs, not pay nearly $10,000 a week to a consulting firm. I opened the next folder. Grant/personal. Inside were photos of credit card statements. I saw charges for jewelry stores I knew my mother didn't shop at. I saw hotel bills in cities where the trust had no business. I looked at the laptop. It was thick and clunky. I opened it, but the battery was dead. Then I picked up the prepaid phone. It was still in the blister pack, but the seal was broken. I took it out and held the power button. The screen lit up with a cheap blue glow. The battery was low, but it had a charge. I scrolled to the contacts. There was only one number saved. It was labeled Haley. I stared at the screen. She had bought a burner phone just to call me? Why hadn't she used it? My hands were shaking. I looked at the boxes of evidence. This wasn't just a wife checking up on a cheating husband. This was years of meticulous documentation. This was a forensic accounting of my father's life. My mother. The woman who grew quiet when my father entered the room. The woman he called simple had been building a case against him for years. I felt a wave of nausea. Why didn't she tell me? Why did she leave me here alone with him? But then I remembered the note. Trust what you notice. She didn't leave me alone. She left me ammunition. I stood up, my knees cracking. I couldn't take the boxes. If Grant came into my room and found them, it would be over. I had to leave them here. I took the prepaid phone and slipped it into my pocket. I took my smartphone and snapped a clear photo of the ledger page with the Ridgeway payments. I put the lid back on the box. I checked the lock. I rolled the door down and snapped the padlock shut. As I drove back to the estate, the fear in my chest began to harden into something else. For my entire life, I had believed the story Grant Morris told me. I believed I was the slow one, the disappointment, the one who needed to be managed and protected. I believed I was worthless. But my mother hadn't believed it. She had trusted me with the truth she couldn't carry alone. I pulled into the driveway and looked up at the dark house. Grant was asleep in his master suite, probably dreaming of his legacy. He thought he had buried his wife and silenced his daughter. He had no idea what he had just unlocked. I walked into the house, quiet as a ghost, and for the first time in years, I did not feel small. I felt dangerous. I sat in my car in the far corner of a grocery store parking lot. The engine off, the windows rolled up against the morning chill. The prepaid phone I had taken from the storage unit felt heavy in my hand. Like a grenade with the pin pulled, I had charged it fully overnight, hidden under my pillow while I slept fitfully in my childhood bed. Now, away from the prying eyes of Mrs. Gable and the suffocating presence of my father, I turned it on. There were no calls in the log, no sent messages, but when I opened the drafts folder, my breath hitched. There were dozens of them, all addressed to my number, none of them sent. December 12th. Haley, I'm sorry I missed your call. He was in the room. I can never speak freely when he is in the room. January 4th. Do not sign anything he gives you, not ever. Tell him you need to show it to a lawyer first. Blame me if you have to. February 14th. I saw the way he looked at you at dinner. He does it on purpose. He wants you to feel small. Please do not believe him. I scrolled down, my vision blurring. It was a diary of silence, a record of a mother desperate to reach her daughter but terrified of the consequences. And then, near the bottom, a message dated just 3 weeks before she died. He will call you worthless, so you will not notice what you are worth. He needs you to be weak, so no one asks why the money is in your name. I stared at the screen until the backlight timed out and the phone went dark. Why the money is in your name? What money? As far as I knew, I had a checking account with $2,000 in it and a used car that needed new brakes. My mother had always had an allowance from Grant. That was the family lore. Grant made the money. Elena spent it on flowers and charity luncheons. But the text suggested something else entirely. It suggested leverage. I drove back to the house, my mind racing. When I walked into the kitchen, Grant was already dressed for the day, wearing a navy suit that cost more than my annual rent. He was pacing while talking on his phone, his voice booming. "It is a strategy brunch, not a social hour," he barked into the receiver. "Make sure the packets are ready. I want the donors to see efficiency, not chaos." He hung up and turned to me. "Good, you are up," he said, as if it were noon instead of 8 in the morning. "Get changed. You are coming to headquarters. I have plans." I lied. "Cancel them," he said. "We have a strategy brunch for the top-tier donors today. I need family presence. It looks bad if my daughter is skulking around the house while I am out building the future. I am not skulking." I said, "I am grieving. Grief is active. Haley," he said, checking his reflection in the microwave door. "It is about honoring the dead by continuing the work. Put on something professional. And try to look like you want to be there." The headquarters of the Harrowell Learning Trust was a glass and steel monolith in the center of the business district. It looked less like a charity and more like a hedge fund. The lobby was polished marble, and a massive portrait of my father hung behind the reception desk. Grant swept in like a king returning to his court. Staffers scattered or straightened up as he passed. He led me into a large conference room where a team of young, energetic employees were assembling presentation folders. "This is my daughter, Haley," Grant announced to the room. "She's going to help you out today." He turned to me and pointed to a stack of glossy brochures and a pile of envelopes. "We are behind on the donor packets," he said. Just fold these and stuff the envelopes. Try to keep the creases sharp." He didn't wait for an answer. He walked over to a young man in a slim-fit suit who looked about 22. "Jason, excellent work on the analytic projections," Grant said, clapping the boy on the shoulder. "Harvard really does teach you how to think, doesn't it?" "Thank you, sir." Jason beamed. "And Sarah?" Grant continued. Turning to a young woman, that grant proposal was poetry. Yale should be proud. He left the room, leaving me standing there with the envelopes. The message was clear. These children, with their pedigrees and their crisp suits, were the real heirs to his respect. I was the manual labor. I was the cautionary tale. I sat down at the end of the table and started folding. The staff ignored me at first, their conversation tentative, but eventually, they forgot I was there. I was just the boss's slow daughter, the one with the simple heart. "Did you hear about the compliance issue in District 4? A woman whispered to her neighbor. "Shh," the neighbor hissed. Glancing at the door, "We aren't supposed to talk about that. It is fine," the first woman said. "It got smoothed over. We made a $50,000 donation to the Oversight Committee's favorite pet project. The audit went away the next day." I kept folding, my eyes fixed on the glossy paper in my hands. Compliance issue, donation to Oversight Committee. It sounded like a bribe, but the fear in their voices was real. They weren't gossiping about office romances. They were terrified of something structural. I finished the stack of envelopes in an hour. When I went to find Grant, I found him in his office, laughing with Celeste. She was perched on the edge of his desk, looking elegant and predatory. "All done?" Grant asked, not looking up from his tablet. "Yes," I said. "Good. You can go grab some coffee in the break room. We have a meeting in 5 minutes." I walked out, but I didn't go to the break room. I went to the bathroom and pulled out my phone. I needed to talk to someone who understood numbers, someone who wasn't on Grant's payroll. I texted Dylan Reeve. Dylan and I had worked together at a copy shop years ago, before he got his accounting degree. He was cynical, sharp, and hated corporate posturing. He was now an independent bookkeeper for small businesses. "Hey, Dylan, it is Haley. Long time. I need a favor. Can you look at a photo of a ledger for me? Off the record?" He replied 2 minutes later. "Haley Morris, I heard about your mom. I am sorry. Send it over." I sent him the photo of the Ridgeway payments I had taken in the storage unit. "Give me 10 minutes. He wrote. I went back to the conference room and waited. Grant eventually marched in, leading a group of wealthy donors. He introduced me again, this time as my daughter, who is helping out with the admin work today. The donors smiled politely. I was a prop, a symbol of his benevolent paternalism. "Look," the subtext said, "I even take care of the useless ones." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I waited until the donors were distracted by a pie chart before I checked it. "Dylan, this is weird. It is structured spending. See how every payment is $9,950? That is $50 under the reporting limit. If they paid 10 grand, the bank has to file a currency transaction report to the feds. Someone is trying very hard to move money without triggering an audit. Who is Ridgeway? I do not know." I typed back, "Dylan, be careful. People go to jail for structuring. It is money laundering 101. I felt a cold sweat prickle my hairline. My father wasn't just mean, he was criminal, and my mother had known. That evening, I met Mara Klein at a diner on the edge of town. She looked even more exhausted than she had the day before. She ordered black coffee and a slice of pie she didn't eat. I looked at the will again. She said, keeping her voice low, "It is aggressive. Haley." "Aggressive how?" "Your mother created what is called a spendthrift trust, but with a twist. Usually, these are set up by parents to protect a reckless child from spending all their money, but this one, it protects the assets from Grant." "How?" "It designates you as the sole beneficiary, but it also names you as the controlling trustee upon her death. That means you decide how the money is invested, where it goes, and who sees the books. Grant has no access. He can't even demand an accounting unless he sues you. And she did this knowing he would be furious?" I asked. "She did it because she knew he would be furious. Mara said. She anticipated a conflict. She specifically included a no contest clause. If Grant tries to challenge the validity of the trust, he loses his spousal share of her other assets. She boxed him in. Why didn't she tell me? I think she was afraid that if you knew, you would give it up to keep the peace, Mara said gently. You have a history of accommodating him. I looked down at the Formica table. She was right. I had spent my life folding myself into smaller shapes to avoid his anger. What do I have to do? I asked. You have to sign the acceptance of the trusteeship. Once you sign, the assets are yours to control, but once you sign, Grant will know. He will receive a notification from the bank. I took the pen from her hand. I didn't hesitate. I signed my name on the line. Let him know. I said. The fallout was immediate. The next morning, the atmosphere at breakfast was toxic. Grant didn't look at me. He slammed his coffee cup onto the saucer so hard I thought it would crack. You spoke to Mara, he said. It wasn't a question. I did. And you signed the papers. It is what Mom wanted. What your mother wanted was to be difficult. He spat. She didn't understand finance. She thought she was being clever, locking that money away. Do you have any idea how much tax liability that trust creates? Do you have any idea how hard it is to manage those investments? I can learn. I said, Learn? He laughed, a harsh barking sound. You? Haley, you can't even manage your own career. You sell used paperbacks for a living, and now you think you can manage a multi-million-dollar trust? It is my money, Dad. It is family money, he roared, standing up. It is money I earned, money I put in her name for tax purposes. And now you are holding it hostage because you want to play businesswoman. He took a breath, composing himself. He walked over to the window and looked out at the grounds. Fine, he said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. You want to play? Let us play. You can stay in this house, Haley, but only if you contribute. I will pay rent. I said, I do not want your rent money. It is peanuts. If you want to live under my roof, you will work for the trust. You will learn how real professionals operate. You will be my personal assistant. I have a job. You will take a leave of absence, or you can pack your bags and find an apartment in town. But good luck finding a lease with your credit score and no cosigner. He knew he had me. I didn't have the savings for a deposit on a new place yet, not without access to the trust funds, which Mara said would take weeks to clear. I will do it, I said. Good. You start tomorrow. 8 sharp. Wear something that doesn't look like it came from a thrift store. That afternoon, I hid in the library, pretending to read. I pulled up the photos I had taken of my mother's old calendar from the storage unit. I was looking for the dates that matched the Ridgway payments. There was nothing. No meeting with Ridgway, no consultant review. But then I noticed something else. On every Tuesday, the day before the transfers were usually initiated, there was a single letter written in the corner of the calendar square. R. R at 2 o'clock. R at 4 o'clock. I went back to the box of receipts I had photographed. I found a receipt from a mailbox rental store called The Postscript, dated on a Tuesday. The address was on the other side of town, in a strip mall that had seen better days. I drove there. The store was closed, the windows papered over. A for lease sign hung in the window. I walked to the neighboring business, a dry cleaner. Excuse me. I asked the woman behind the counter, do you know when the mailbox place closed? About 6 months ago, she said. Owner got into some trouble. Police raided the place. Police? Yeah. Something about mail fraud. People setting up fake businesses to receive checks. I thanked her and walked back to my car. Fake businesses. Ridgway Civic Solutions wasn't a consulting firm. It was a mailbox. I drove to the second address I had found on a scrap of paper in the storage unit. It was a law office downtown. The sign on the door said Holloway Associates, but the paper in my hand, dated 3 years ago, said Ridgway Legal Services. I walked in. The receptionist looked up. Hi, I said, trying to sound casual. Is this Ridgway Legal? No. Honey, this is Holloway. We took over this suite 2 years ago. Do you know what happened to the previous tenant? She wrinkled her nose. Not really. They cleared out overnight, left a bunch of shredders behind. Why? Just looking for an old friend? I said. I walked out, my heart pounding. Ridgway was a ghost. It existed only to receive money from my father's charity. And my mother had tracked it all down. She had gone to these places. She had watched them. When I got home, Celeste was waiting for me in the living room. She had 2 glasses of white wine on the coffee table. Haley, sit down, she said, patting the sofa cushion next to her. We need to talk. I sat on the adjacent armchair. Grant is really stressed, she said, sipping her wine. This trust business. It hurts him. He feels like you do not trust him. He just called me incompetent this morning. I said, that doesn't scream trust to me. He is just protective. Celeste said, look, we came up with an idea, a way to show the donors that the family is united. She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was titled Family Unity Statement. I read the first paragraph. In the wake of Elena Morris's passing, the Morris family stands united in their commitment to the Harrowell Learning Trust. While Elena was the heart of our home, she left all financial and strategic decisions to her husband, Grant, whose vision she implicitly trusted. We honor her memory by continuing to follow his lead. It was a lie, a legal, public lie. It erased her agency. It erased the trust she had set up. It erased me. You want me to sign this? I asked. It would mean a lot to him. Celeste said, and it would smooth things over with the bank. If you sign this, we can just handle the trust internally. You won't have to worry about the legal headaches. And if I don't sign? Celeste's smile didn't waver, but her eyes went cold. Haley, do not make this harder than it needs to be. You are a sweet girl, but you are out of your depth. You do not want to be enemies with your father. He wins. He always wins. I stood up. I will think about it. I went upstairs and locked my door. I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. I started a spreadsheet. Column A, date. Column B, Ridgway payment. Column C, Grant's location. I cross-referenced the dates from the ledger with my own memory of family events. February 12th, $9,950 to Ridgway. That was the week Grant bought the new Mercedes. March 15th, $9,950. That was the week he took Celeste to Paris for a conference. April 2nd, $9,950. That was the week he paid off the contractor who renovated the pool house. He wasn't just hiding money. He was siphoning it. He was stealing from his own charity to fund his lifestyle. And he was using a fake consulting firm to wash the checks. And he had the audacity to call me worthless. I went back to the storage unit the next night. I had to be careful. Grant was tracking my comings and goings more closely now. I told him I was going to a movie. I opened the box marked Private. Inside, buried under a stack of old greeting cards, was a sealed envelope. On the front, in thick black marker, my mother had written, "If he starts calling you uneducated again." I ripped it open. Inside was a list of account numbers. But they weren't bank accounts. They were student loan accounts. There was a note attached. Haley, he told you he paid for your college. He told you he cut you off because you were failing. He lied. He never paid the tuition. He took out loans in your name, using his address so you wouldn't see the bills. He defaulted on them on purpose to tank your credit so you couldn't leave. These debts are not yours. They are fraud, and I have the proof. I stared at the paper. The world tilted on its axis. The reason I couldn't get an apartment. The reason I couldn't get a car loan. The reason I felt trapped in my small life. It wasn't because I was irresponsible. It was because he had sabotaged me. He had financially crippled me to keep me under his thumb. I felt a scream building in my throat, hot and jagged. I wanted to drive home and throw the paper in his face. I wanted to burn his house down. But then I looked at the prepaid phone. He wins by making people doubt their own memory. If I screamed, he would call me hysterical. If I confronted him now, he would spin it. He would say I was confused, that I signed those papers and forgot, that I was simple. I took a deep breath. I forced the scream back down until it settled into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to study. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. The truth. I started typing. I listed every lie, every stolen dollar, every manipulated moment. I wasn't the daughter he thought I was. I wasn't the simple heart. I was the witness. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't looking for his approval. I was looking for his weak spot. I closed the laptop. I put the envelope in my bag. I drove home. Listening to the tires hum on the pavement, when I walked into the house, Grant was in the library, reading a book. He looked up, his face a mask of paternal concern. "Did you have a nice time at the movies?" he asked. "It was educational," I said. He smiled, condescending and secure. "Good. I left the unity statement on your dresser. Sign it before you go to bed. I will look at it," I said. I walked up the stairs, my spine straight, my steps silent. I didn't sign the statement. Instead, I took a red pen and circled the word implicitly in the phrase implicitly trusted. My mother hadn't trusted him implicitly. She had tracked him explicitly, and now, so would I. The next morning, I arrived at the Harrowell headquarters at 7:55. I was wearing a black blazer I had bought at a consignment shop. It was sharp, tailored, and severe. Grant looked surprised when I walked into his office. "You are early," he said. "I want to learn." I said, "You said I needed to see how real professionals operate. So teach me." He looked at me for a long moment, searching for a crack, for a sign of sarcasm, but I gave him nothing, just a calm, flat stare. "All right," he said, gesturing to a pile of filing on the credenza. "Start with the vendor contracts. Alphabetize them." I walked over to the files. I picked up the first one. Ridgeway Civic Solutions. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I just filed it under R, right where it belonged. I spent the day watching. I noticed which employees avoided eye contact with Grant. I noticed the way the CFO, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, sweated when Grant asked about the quarterly projections. I noticed that Celeste had a second phone she kept in her purse. One she checked only when Grant left the room. I was building a map of the fear he used to control everyone. At lunch, I sat in the break room with my sandwich. The two women from the folding party were there. They stopped talking when I sat down. "Don't stop on my account," I said, opening my yogurt. "I am just the assistant." They exchanged a look. "Is it true?" one of them asked, "that you are going to run the scholarship fund?" "My father says I am not ready." I said carefully, "He says I need to understand the complexities first." "He is right," the other woman said, then clamped her hand over her mouth. "I mean, it is complicated. There are a lot of moving parts, like the compliance issues?" I asked softly. Her eyes went wide. "Who told you that?" "No one," I said. "I just have a simple heart. People tell me things." She stared at me, unsure if I was stupid or dangerous. I took a spoonful of yogurt and smiled. That afternoon, I went back to the vendor files. I pulled the Ridgeway contract. I slipped it into my bag, took it to the copier down the hall, made a copy, and returned the original before anyone noticed. When I got home, I added it to the timeline. Ridgeway contract, signed by Grant Morris, witnessed by Celeste Rourke. She was in on it. Of course she was. I looked at the unity statement still sitting on my dresser. I picked it up and tore it in half. Then I tore the halves in half. I dropped the pieces into the trash can. I wasn't going to unify this family. I was going to dissect it. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The ceiling fans spun in slow, hypnotic circles. I thought about my mother. I thought about the years she spent in this house, collecting receipts, writing notes she never sent, terrified of the man sleeping next to her. She had been playing a long game, a game she didn't live to finish, but she had tagged me in. I closed my eyes. I could hear Grant downstairs, laughing on the phone. He sounded happy. He sounded safe. "Enjoy it, Dad," I whispered to the dark room, "because I am just getting started." Dylan Reeve came through. 2 days after I sent him the ledger photo, he sent me an ad address for a coffee shop 3 towns over, away from the sphere of influence of the Harrowell Learning Trust. Priya Haldane was waiting in a back booth. She was small, sharp-eyed, and radiated a kind of kinetic energy, tapping a silver pen against a notebook. She did not order coffee. She had a bottle of water and a look that said she billed by the minute. "I do not do divorce work," she said before I even sat down. "And I do not do family feuds. If this is about getting a bigger allowance from your daddy, I am leaving." "It is not divorce," I said, sliding into the seat. "And it is not about an allowance. It is about theft." Priya stopped tapping the pen. She looked at Dylan, who was sitting next to me, looking uncomfortable in a flannel shirt. "Show her," Dylan said. I pulled out the printed photo of the ledger page, the one with the structured payments to Ridgeway Civic Solutions. I placed it on the table between us. Priya looked at it. Her eyes scanned the numbers, the dates, the repeating $9,950 figure. She didn't blink. "Structuring," she said. "Classic. Who is Ridgeway?" "A shell." I said, "A mailbox rental that closed 6 months ago." "And where did the money go?" "I think it went to my father." Priya leaned back, crossing her arms. She studied my face, looking for cracks. She wasn't looking at the math anymore. She was looking at the liability. "I can trace it," she said. "If you can get me the vendor list and the bank routing numbers, I can build a flow chart that will hold up in court. But I need to know something first, and do not lie to me." "What? Why would your mother hide this from your father?" The question caught me off guard. I had expected her to ask about the statute of limitations or my legal standing. My mother was afraid of him. I said. Priya shook her head. "Women who are just afraid hide cash in a coffee can. They do not build forensic accounting files in a storage unit. Your mother was not just hiding money. Haley, she was building a weapon. Why didn't she pull the trigger?" "I do not know," I whispered. "Find out," Priya said, tearing the page out of her notebook and sliding it to me. "Because if we start pulling threads, the whole sweater is going to unravel. And if you do not know why she stopped, you might trip over the same wire that caught her." I returned to the house with a list of documents Priya needed. The first step was establishing the baseline of control. I needed to see exactly how my mother's finances had been handled in the last year of her life, when her health had started to decline. I used my new authority as executor, which Grant was still contesting, but legally had to respect for the moment, to request copies of her medical and financial paperwork from the family doctor and the bank. When the packet arrived, I sat in the library, the heavy curtains drawn. I spread the papers out on the antique rug. I found a transfer authorization form dated 4 months ago. It moved $50,000 from my mother's personal savings into the joint marital account. I looked at the signature at the bottom. Elena Morris. It was shaky. The E was trailing off. The loops inconsistent. It looked like the handwriting of a woman who was exhausted, or medicated, or guided. I pulled out a birthday card she had written me 2 years ago for comparison. The signature on the card was firm, elegant, with a distinct flourish on the M. The signature on the transfer form looked like a spider crawling across the page. I felt a coldness spread through my chest. I looked at another document, a medical power of attorney update, signed 2 weeks before she died. The signature was barely legible. He didn't just steal from her. He forced her hand. I could picture it. Grant standing over her while she lay in bed, the pen pressed into her trembling fingers, his voice soothing and coercive. "Just sign it, Elena. It is for the best. Do not make this difficult." I took a photo of the mismatched signatures and sent it to Priya. Possibility of coercion. I typed, "She didn't stop building the weapon. He disarmed her." That evening, Grant announced we were having guests for dinner. "It is a small gathering," he said, adjusting his cufflinks in the foyer. "Just a few board members. I want them to see that we are doing well, that the house is stable." He meant he wanted them to see that he was stable. The dinner was an exercise in suffocation. There were 6 of us. Grant, myself, Celeste, and 3 board members. Mr. Henderson, the nervous CFO, Mrs. Talbot, a wealthy donor who loved the sound of her own voice, and a man I didn't know well, Arthur Pym, who ran a local construction firm. I wore the navy dress Celeste had picked out for me. I sat where my mother used to sit, at the foot of the table. Grant was in rare form. He told stories about the early days of the Harrowell Trust, positioning himself as a visionary who saw potential where others saw ruin. He poured the wine himself, playing the humble host. "And how is Haley doing?" Mrs. Talbot asked, turning her benevolent, diamond-studded gaze toward me. "It must be so hard, losing your mother and trying to find your footing at the same time." "I am managing," I said quietly. "Haley is finding her way," Grant interjected, smiling at me with that shark-like warmth. "You know, she has always had a bit of a wandering spirit. She started 3 different degree programs before she decided that higher education wasn't really her path." I gripped my fork. I hadn't dropped out. I had switched from nursing to literature because I fainted at the sight of blood, and then my funding was cut before I could finish the literature degree. "It is not for everyone," Grant continued, slicing his steak. "Some people are just built for simpler things, and that is fine. We need people to run bookstores just as much as we need executives." The table chuckled politely. I felt the heat rising in my cheeks, but I forced my face to remain blank. "Trust what you notice." "Actually," Grant said, leaning forward as if struck by a sudden, generous thought. "I have been thinking, Haley, now that you are back home, maybe we should look into getting you back into a program. A vocational certificate, perhaps? Or maybe finish that associate's degree?" He looked around the table, inviting approval. "I would be happy to pay for it," he said. "The trust has scholarships, of course, but I would pay for this personally. It is never too late to get an education." Haley, it was a masterstroke. To the board, he looked like a saint, the patient father willing to fund the education of his failures. To me, it was a reminder that he controlled the purse strings, and that he viewed me as unfinished business. "I appreciate the offer." "Dad," I said, my voice steady, "but I am actually learning a lot right now. Working at the office has been illuminating." Grant's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. "Speaking of the office," I said, turning to Mr. Henderson, "I was filing some vendor contracts today. I noticed we do a lot of work with Ridgeway Civic Solutions. They seem very efficient." The reaction was instantaneous and subtle. Mr. Henderson dropped his fork. It clattered against the china, a sharp, jarring sound in the quiet room. "Oh, sorry," he stammered, reaching for his napkin. "Butterfingers." Mrs. Talbot frowned. "Ridgeway? I do not recall that name in the annual report." Arthur Pym, the construction magnate, suddenly found the centerpiece very interesting. He cleared his throat and looked at Grant. Grant didn't panic. He didn't even blink. "Consultants," Grant said smoothly. "They handle the back-end logistics for the outreach programs. Boring stuff, really, not the kind of thing that makes for good GALA speeches." He looked at me. His eyes were cold, dead weights. "But let us not bore our guests with logistics. Haley," he said, "tell Mrs. Talbot about your bookstore. Do you sell any books about business? Or is it mostly fantasy?" He emphasized the word fantasy as if it were a diagnosis of my mental state. I smiled. "Mostly mysteries. Actually, people like trying to figure out who is lying before the end of the book." The dinner continued, but the air had changed. Mr. Henderson didn't finish his wine. Arthur Pym left early. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from Priya. I mapped the loop. "Meet me." I met her in her car this time, parked behind a derelict shopping mall. She had a laptop open on the passenger seat. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a flowchart on the screen. It was a circle of arrows. "Harrowell Learning Trust pays Ridgeway Civic Solutions," she said, tracing the line. "Just under the reporting limit," repeatedly. "Ridgeway holds the funds for 3 to 5 days. Then, Ridgeway cuts a check to a vendor called Community Impact Workshops." "Who are they?" I asked. "They do not exist," Priya said. "No website, no business license. But they have a bank account, And guess who owns the building where that bank account is registered? I shook my head. Renfield Development Holdings. Priya said. I stared at the name. It sounded familiar. Renfield. I repeated. It is a property holding group. Priya explained. They own 3 apartment complexes in the city and a commercial lot near the river. And the primary shareholder of Renfield Development Holdings? She hit a key, and a document popped up. It was a certificate of incorporation. Grant Morris. He is paying himself. I said. He is washing the money through 2 layers of shell companies and dumping it into real estate. Priya said. He is taking donations meant for poor kids and buying apartment buildings. It is embezzlement. Haley. Massive. Systemic embezzlement. I felt sick. It was one thing to suspect it. It was another to see the geometry of it. Does the board know? I asked. Henderson definitely knows. Priya said. He signs the checks to Ridgway. The others? Maybe not. They see the polished reports Grant gives them. They do not see the raw data. What do? We need proof that community impact workshops provided no services. Priya said. We need to prove the money bought nothing. And we need to secure your position. If he finds out we know, he will burn everything down. You need to lock him out of the assets you control. I went straight to Mara Klein's office. I told her everything. I told her about Ridgway, about Renfield, about the signatures. Mara listened, her face growing pale. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose. Your mother knew, Mara said softly. She must have known. That is why she structured the trust this way. She pulled the file again. Haley, look at this clause, she said, pointing to a dense paragraph of legalese. Article 4, Section C. The distribution of any assets from the protected trust to the marital estate requires the affirmative written consent of the controlling trustee. That is me. I said, that is you. Grant cannot move a single dime of your mother's personal millions without your signature. And here's the kicker. The Harrowell Trust's liquidity is tied to a line of credit secured by your mother's personal assets. I frowned. What does that mean? It means his charity runs on her collateral. Mara said, if you freeze the assets in the protected trust, or if you refuse to reauthorize the collateral agreement, the charity stops. I said, his cash flow stops. Mara corrected. The loop Priya found? He needs liquidity to keep that going. He needs fresh money coming in to cover the money he is pulling out. If you cut off the collateral, the bank freezes the line of credit. The Ponzi scheme stalls. He needs me. I realized. That is why he is trying to make me sign the unity statement. That is why he is offering to pay for my education. He needs me to sign the renewal on the collateral. He needs you compliant, Mara said, or he needs you declared incompetent so he can appoint himself as trustee. I left Mara's office with a copy of the trust in my bag. I felt a strange new sensation. Leverage. But leverage wasn't enough. I needed to understand the depth of his sabotage. I went home and went straight to the storage unit box labeled Private. I dug through the papers until I found a file I had ignored before. It was labeled Haley/certification. Inside was a rejection letter from the Allied Health Certification Board, dated 5 years ago. This was from when I had tried to become a medical billing specialist. A practical, boring job I thought I could handle. I had been rejected without explanation. I had assumed I just wasn't good enough. Stapled to the back of the rejection letter was a printed email. It was from an anonymous sender to the certification board. Subject: Concern regarding applicant Haley Morris. Body: To whom it may concern. I feel obligated to inform you that Ms. Morris has a history of financial instability and ethical lapses in previous employment. While I wish her the best, I do not believe she is suitable for a role handling sensitive medical billing data. The email address was a generic Gmail account, but I recognized the phrasing. I feel obligated to inform you. Ethical lapses. It was Grant. He had written an anonymous letter to destroy my chances at a $30,000 a year job. Why? To keep me dependent? To prove he was right about me being a failure? I drove home. The rage was a cold, hard knot in my throat. Grant was in the sunroom, reading the Wall Street Journal. Dad, I said, standing in the doorway. He looked up, annoyed at the interruption. "What is it?" "Haley? I was thinking about that certification program you mentioned at dinner." I said, "The vocational one." "Yes? I applied to a program like that 5 years ago. For medical billing, I remember," he said, turning the page. "You didn't get in." "No, I didn't. I always wondered why." "My grades were good." He shrugged. "Competition is stiff." "Haley, maybe you just didn't interview well. You can be awkward." I found the rejection letter. I said, "There was a complaint in my file. Someone sent an anonymous email saying I had ethical lapses." Grant stopped reading. He didn't look up, but his hands went still on the newsprint. "That sounds like an excuse," he said dismissively. "People blame anonymous complaints when they don't want to admit they weren't qualified." It used the phrase, "I feel obligated to inform you," I said. "You use that phrase a lot." He folded the paper slowly. He took off his reading glasses and looked at me. His eyes were void of affection. "You are paranoid." "Haley," he said, "I am just noticing patterns." I said, "You are noticing what you want to see because it is easier than accepting the truth." He said, his voice rising, "The truth is that you have failed at everything you have ever tried, not because of some grand conspiracy, but because you are not tenacious. You give up, and now you are inventing villains to explain why you are 33 years old and living in your dead mother's house." He stood up, towering over me. "You are not educated enough to understand how grown-up systems work." He sneered. "Background checks, references, due diligence. These aren't sabotage. They are standards. If you can't meet them, do not blame me." I stood my ground. I didn't cry. "I understand systems better than you think," I said. I walked away. He called after me, asking if I had signed the unity statement yet. I didn't answer. I needed to talk to someone who knew his tactics. I needed an outside perspective. I found Noah Vance in a dive bar on the south side of the city. Dylan had given me his number. Noah was a former investigative journalist for the Globe who had written a series of scathing articles about local corruption before suddenly retiring to write a blog about fishing. He was sitting at the bar, nursing a beer. He looked tired, his jacket frayed at the elbows. "Noah Vance?" I asked. He looked at me. He recognized me instantly. I could see the wariness in his eyes. "You are Grant Morris's daughter," he said. "I am. I do not talk to family," he said, turning back to his drink. "I am not here on his behalf." I said, "I am here because I found the Ridgway file." Noah froze. He put his beer down. "Ridgway," he muttered. "I haven't heard that name in 3 years." He turned to face me. "You know about the laundering?" he asked. "I know enough. I know he funnels money to Renfield. I know he buys property." Noah let out a short, bitter laugh. "We had it all. You know, me and my editor. We had the flowcharts. We had the witness statements. What happened?" "Grant happened." Noah said, "He didn't sue us. That would have required discovery. He just eroded us. A source suddenly got threatened with a lawsuit for breaking an NDA. Another source had her car tires slashed 3 times in a week. My editor got a call from the publisher saying our funding for the investigation was cut." "And you?" Noah took a sip of beer. "An anonymous website popped up. It detailed my history of alcoholism and unethical journalistic practices. It was all lies. But it was SEO optimized. It was the first thing you saw when you Googled my name. He destroyed my credibility before I could print a word." He looked at me, his eyes intense. "Your dad wins by making people doubt their own memory," Noah said. "He gaslights on an industrial scale. He makes you think you are the crazy one for noticing the math doesn't add up. He did it to my mother." I said, "He does it to everyone." Noah said, "Be careful, kid. If he knows you have the Ridgway file, he won't just ground you. He will dismantle you." I left the bar feeling heavy. The scope of Grant's malice was terrifying. He wasn't just a bad father. He was a machine that crushed anyone who threatened his image. I drove back to the estate. It was late. The house was dark. I sat in the driveway, looking at the looming silhouette of the mansion. I thought about my mother. She had stayed. She had endured the gaslighting, the emotional abuse, the isolation, and she had built an exit ramp, a trust fund he couldn't touch, a file of evidence that could send him to prison. But she never used it. Why? Why would your mother hide this from your father? Priya had asked. Maybe she was waiting for me. Maybe she was waiting for me to be strong enough to leave with her. And I never was. I was always failing, always retreating, always proving Grant right. The guilt washed over me, heavy and suffocating. Had I trapped her? Had she stayed to protect me because I couldn't protect myself? I pulled the prepaid phone out of my pocket. I needed to hear her voice. I needed to know I wasn't crazy. I dialed the voicemail. I had checked it before, and it had been empty, but I hadn't checked the saved messages. I pressed the button for saved messages. Message 1. Saved on October 15th. My mother's voice filled the car. It was shaky, sounding like she was hiding in a closet. Haley, if you are hearing this, he has already started the story. He is telling people I was weak. He is telling you that you are weak. There was a pause. I heard a door slam in the background of the recording. She lowered her voice to a whisper. Do not let him finish it for you. You are not who he says you are. You are the one who notices. You are the one who remembers. Use the key. Use the leverage. And Haley. Her voice broke. I didn't stay because I was weak. I stayed to gather enough proof to make sure that when we left, he couldn't follow us. I ran out of time. Do not run out of time. The message ended. I sat in the silence of the driveway. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of clarity. She hadn't stayed because I was a burden. She had stayed to build a bomb, and she had handed me the detonator. I looked at the house. Grant was in there, sleeping the sleep of the righteous, believing he had won. He thought he was the author of this family's history. He was wrong. I wiped my face. I put the car in gear and drove into the garage. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to finish the story. The dining room table in my rental apartment, a cramped, second-floor walk-up Mara had helped me secure under her maiden name, had ceased to be a place for eating. It was now a command center. Priya Haldane stood over the surface, which was covered in a blizzard of paper. We had organized the chaos of my mother's storage unit into 3 distinct piles, categorized by sticky notes in Priya's neat, architectural handwriting, financial flows, document irregularities, and witness accounts. We are building a mosaic, Priya said, picking up a bank statement. You cannot see the picture if you look at the tiles individually. You have to step back. I stepped back. The picture was ugly. Under financial flows, we had the Ridgeway Loop, money leaving the Harrowell Learning Trust, dipping under the radar of federal reporting, washing through a fake consultancy, and emerging in the accounts of Renfield Development Holdings. Under document irregularities, we had the forged signatures on my mother's medical forms and the backdated contracts Grant had signed. Under witness accounts, the pile was thin but growing. We had the text messages from my mother. We had the anonymous email that tanked my certification. And we had the hushed conversations I was recording in my journal every day after work. It is not enough just to know he did it, I said, staring at the timeline we had taped to the wall. We have to prove intent. Priya tapped the financial flows pile. Intent is in the structure, she said. You do not accidentally structure payments to avoid reporting limits 50 times in a row. That is premeditation. But we need to know why he picked that specific number. $9,950. Why not $9,000? Why not 8? Because $10,000 triggers the IRS. I said, yes. But the IRS triggers happen at the bank level, Priya said. He could have written checks for $6,000 and still avoided the IRS. He pushed it right to the edge. There is another ceiling he was afraid of hitting. I just need to find it. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Grant. Dinner tonight, 7 sharp. We need to discuss the schedule for next week. I looked at the time. I had 2 hours to transform from a forensic investigator back into the obedient, grieving daughter. I have to go. I told Priya, I have to go play the part. Do not forget. Priya said, not looking up from her calculator. You are not playing a part anymore. Haley, you are going undercover. There is a difference. The difference, I found, was in the breathing. Playing a part meant holding my breath. Hoping no one noticed the cracks. Going undercover meant breathing through them, observing the cracks in everyone else. Dinner was served in the formal dining room, a space that felt even larger and colder without my mother at the foot of the table. Grant sat at the head, looking particularly pleased with himself. He was wearing a new suit, a midnight blue silk blend that shimmered under the chandelier. Big news, he announced as the soup was served. We have finalized the date for the annual gala. It will be 2 weeks from Saturday. That is soon. I said, we have to strike while the emotional momentum is high. Grant said, dipping his spoon into the bisque. The board agrees. This year's theme is legacy, and I've decided to make a special announcement. He paused, waiting for me to ask. I obliged. What announcement? I am launching the Elena Morris Legacy Scholarship, he said, his voice dripping with performative solemnity. A full-ride endowment for underprivileged students. It will be the centerpiece of the evening. I will announce it, and then I will introduce you. Me? Yes. You will stand with me. You won't have to speak. I will handle the remarks. But you need to be there. The visual is important. Father and daughter, united in grief, carrying the torch forward. He looked at me, his eyes scanning my outfit, a simple gray cardigan and slacks. With critical assessment, and Haley, he added, his tone sharpening, wear something respectable. Do not embarrass me in front of people who matter. This isn't one of your book club meetings. This is the city's elite. I swallowed a spoonful of soup. It tasted like nothing. I will find something appropriate. I said, Celeste will help you. Grant said, she has already pulled a few options. Of course she had. The next afternoon, Celeste cornered me in the guest bedroom where I was currently pretending to live. She had a garment bag in her hand and a determined look in her eye. Grant wants you to look serene, Celeste said, unzipping the bag. She revealed a dress. It was a pale, muted pink, high neck, long sleeves, floor length. It was a beautiful dress, technically, but on me, it would look like a costume. It was the dress of a ghost. Try it on, she urged. I stepped into the bathroom and pulled the dress on. I looked in the mirror. The fabric swallowed me. It made me look frail, young, and harmless. I walked back out. Celeste clapped her hands together softly. Perfect, she cooed. You look so sweet. The donors will want to protect you. That is the point, isn't it? I asked. Celeste paused, her smile freezing for a microsecond. I do not know what you mean, she said. You want me to look like a child. I said, quiet, grateful, small. If I look like I can't take care of myself, then Grant looks like a hero for taking care of me. Celeste stepped closer. Her perfume was expensive and cloying. Haley, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You are overthinking it. Grant just wants a clean narrative. He is under a lot of pressure. The best thing you can do for yourself is to fit into the picture he is painting. If you stick out, he will hammer you down. I am trying to help you avoid the hammer. I looked at her. I realized then that Celeste wasn't a co-conspirator. She was a hostage who had fallen in love with her cage. She knew exactly who he was. She just thought she was smart enough to survive him. I will wear the dress, I said. Good girl, Celeste said, patting my cheek. That evening, I met Noah Vance at a park bench near the river. The wind was biting, whipping the dead leaves around our feet. I have someone you need to meet. Noah said. A woman was sitting on the bench next to him, wrapped in a thick wool coat, her hands buried deep in her pockets. She looked to be in her late 40s, with tired eyes and a mouth drawn tight with anxiety. Haley, this is Lena Corbett, Noah said. She used to run the community outreach program for Harrowell. Lena looked at me, then quickly looked away. I wasn't sure I should be talking to you. She said, I signed an NDA. NDAs cover proprietary information. I said, reciting a line Mara had taught me. They do not cover criminal activity. Lena flinched at the word criminal. I do not know if it was criminal. she said softly. But it was wrong. Tell her about the workshops, Noah prompted gently. Lena took a deep breath. 3 years ago, Grant, your father, told me we had received a grant for a series of financial literacy workshops for single mothers. He said Ridgeway Civic Solutions would handle the curriculum and the logistics. All I had to do was coordinate the venue. And, I asked, I booked the community center. I put up flyers. But 2 days before the first workshop, Grant called me. He said Ridgeway had decided to move the workshops to an online format to save costs. He told me to cancel the room booking. So they happened online? That is what I thought, Lena said. But a month later, I needed the attendance numbers for the annual report. I asked Grant for the login data. He told me not to worry about it, that Ridgeway handled the reporting. She looked down at her boots. Then, a week later, a file appeared on my desk. It was a list of names, sign-in sheets, for in-person workshops, the ones that were canceled. Yes, and the dates were all wrong. They were dated for weekends when the community center was closed. And the names. I recognized some of them. They were people from our donor list, people from the neighborhood. I called one of them, a Mrs. Gable. Not your housekeeper. A different one. I asked her if she enjoyed the workshop. She had no idea what I was talking about. What did you do? I asked. I went to Grant. I told him there was a mistake. I told him the lists were fake. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself. He told me I was tired. He told me I was under a lot of stress and that I was misremembering the schedule. He said if I couldn't keep track of simple dates, maybe I wasn't cut out for the job. He offered me a severance package if I resigned immediately. He said if I stayed, he would have to put me on a performance improvement plan. So you left. I said, I have kids, Lena said, her voice cracking. I couldn't risk getting fired for cause. I took the money. I signed the NDA, but I kept a copy of the list. You have the list? Noah asked, leaning forward. I have a photo of it, Lena said, on my old phone. Send it to me. I said, please. She nodded. I stood up and reached into my bag. I pulled out a small notepad. Lena, I said, did my mother ever talk to you? Lena stopped. A strange expression crossed her face. Sadness, and something like respect. Once, she said, about a week after I left, she met me in the grocery store parking lot. She slipped an envelope through my car window. It had $5,000 cash in it. What did she say? She said, I am sorry he made you feel crazy. You are not crazy. Keep this for a rainy day. I felt a lump form in my throat. My mother hadn't just been watching. She had been trying to bandage the wounds Grant inflicted. Thank you, Lena, I said. The next morning, I went to Mara Klein's office. I needed to know if the fake workshops gave us enough to move on. But Mara had other news. She was holding a legal document, her hands shaking slightly. He has filed a motion, she said. What kind of motion? A petition to amend the probate filings, Mara said. He is claiming that due to severe emotional distress following the sudden death of her mother, you are unfit to serve as trustee. He is asking the court to appoint a temporary conservator over the trust assets. Himself, I asked. Himself. Can he do that? He can try, Mara said grimly. He has attached affidavits, one from a doctor, a friend of his, I assume, stating that grief can cause cognitive decline, and one from... She hesitated. From who? Mara? From Celeste, she said, stating that she has observed erratic behavior, paranoia, and an inability to manage basic self-care in you since you moved home. I felt the blood drain from my face, the dress, the shopping trip, the constant comments about me being overwhelmed. It was all a setup. They were building a case file on my insanity. He is trying to section me. I said, he is trying to strip you of legal agency. Mara said, if the judge grants this, even temporarily, Grant gets control of the money, and once he has control, he will drain it. He will cover the tracks of the Ridgeway payments, and by the time you get your capacity back, the evidence will be gone. My heart hammered against my ribs. The walls of the office felt like they were closing in. I could hear Grant's voice in my head. You are not tenacious. You give up. Panic rose in my throat, hot and sour. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. Then I remembered the voicemail. Don't let him finish the story for you. I took a deep breath. I counted to 4. I forced my pulse to slow down. No, I said. No? Mara asked. We are not going to fight this with a counter-motion. I said, we are going to let him file it. Haley, that is dangerous. It is arrogant. I said, he is overreaching. He thinks I will crumble. He thinks I will have a breakdown in court and prove him right. I pulled out my notebook. I have dates. Mara, I have the times Celeste tried to manipulate me. I have the recordings of him calling me stupid. If he wants to talk about my mental state in court, we will talk about his. We will talk about gaslighting. We will submit the evidence of the coerced signatures on Mom's medical forms. I looked at Mara. I am not unstable. I said, I am just angry. And I'm going to write down every single thing he does between now and the hearing. Mara looked at me, and for the first time, she smiled. Okay, she said. We document everything. I left the office and called Priya. I have the missing variable, Priya said before I could say hello. The missing variable? The $9,950. She said, I accessed the old board meeting minutes from 5 years ago. There is a bylaw. Any expenditure over $10,000 requires a dual signature, the treasurer and the chairman, Mr. Henderson. I said, exactly. Grant didn't just want to avoid the IRS. He wanted to bypass Henderson. Even though Henderson is weak, Grant didn't want to risk him seeing the sheer volume of cash going out by keeping it under $10,000. Grant could sign the checks himself. Sole authority. He was stealing from under their noses, using their own rules. I said, it proves he knew it was unauthorized. Priya said, if it was legitimate consulting work, he would have just had Henderson sign off. The structuring proves he was hiding it from the board. We have him. I said, we have the gun. Priya said, now we need to catch him holding it. I needed a break. I needed to be somewhere that didn't smell of lies and toner ink. I drove to the small public library on the edge of town, the one my mother used to visit on Tuesday afternoons. It was a humble brick building, quiet and smelling of dust and rain. I walked through the stacks, trailing my fingers over the spines of the books. I went to the front desk. An older woman with bright red glasses was stamping books. Excuse me, I said. My mother, Elena Morris, used to come here. The woman's face lit up. Elena. Oh, we miss her so much. She was our angel. I smiled. She loved reading. She loved helping. The woman said, come here. Let me show you something. She led me to a small bulletin board near the adult education classroom. There was a modest brass plaque screwed into the wall, in gratitude for the anonymous donor whose generosity made the adult literacy program possible. That was her? I asked. The woman nodded. She made us promise not to use her name. She said her husband, well, she said he liked big names on big buildings, but she preferred the quiet work. She paid for the books, the tutors, everything. She taught a few classes herself. You know, she did? Yes, Tuesdays at 2. Reading comprehension for adults. She was wonderful. She had so much patience. I stared at the plaque. Tuesdays at 2. The R in her calendar wasn't for Ridgeway. It was for Reading. While Grant was washing money through a fake charity to build his empire, my mother was sneaking away to teach adults how to read, paying for it with her own allowance, and refusing to take credit. Grant used charity as a shield. Elena used it as a ladder for others. I felt a surge of pride so strong it made my knees weak. He called her simple. He called her weak. But she was the only thing in this town that was real. I drove home with a new resolve. Grant wasn't just a thief. He was a fraud in every sense of the word, and I was done being afraid of him. I found him in the study. He was pouring a brandy. Haley, he said, not turning around. Celeste tells me the dress fits. It fits the narrative. I said. He turned, swirling the amber liquid. Is there something you want to say? I walked over to the desk. I placed the rejection letter from the certification board on the mahogany surface, the one with the anonymous email attached. I know you wrote this. I said. Grant glanced at it, then looked back at me. His face was bored. We have discussed this. You are obsessing over ancient history. I know you wrote it because you used the same IP address to send it that you used to log into the Harrowell server. I lied. I didn't know that for sure. But I gambled. Grant's eyes flickered. Just for a second. So what if I did? He said, his voice dropping. You were going to fail anyway. I just saved you the embarrassment of dragging it out. You sabotaged me. I said, you kept me uneducated so you could call me uneducated. I protected you. He snapped, slamming the glass down. You are worthless without my name. Haley, you have no skills, no grit, no vision. Everything you have, this house, your clothes, your food, comes from my work. Then let me go. I said calmly. What? If I am so worthless, let me go. Withdraw the petition for the conservatorship. Sign a release on the trust assets. Let me take my mother's money and leave. You will never see me again. Grant laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. And let you squander millions? Let you ruin the legacy I built? No, you are going to stay right here. You are going to sign over the voting rights of the trust to me. In exchange for a generous monthly stipend. Security? Haley, that is what I'm offering. Security, I repeated. Yes, you will never have to work again. You can play shopkeeper at your bookstore, and I will handle the real world. I looked at him. I saw the fear behind the bluster. He needed that signature. He needed the collateral. Without it, the house of cards would fall. Put it in writing, I said. Grant paused. What? Write it down. A formal offer. You want me to exchange my trustee voting rights for a stipend. Draft the contract. I will have Mara review it. He stared at me. He knew he couldn't write it down. A contract like that would be proof of self-dealing. It would violate every fiduciary duty he had. It would be illegal. We do not need lawyers for this, he said smoothly. It is a family agreement, a handshake. I smiled, a smile that didn't reach my eyes. If it is not in writing, it doesn't exist. Dad, you taught me that. I saw the vein in his temple throb. He wanted to hit me. I could see the violence coiling in his shoulders, but he didn't. He couldn't. Not with the GALA coming up. Not with the emotional distress petition pending. He needed to look like the aggrieved father, not the abuser. You are testing my patience. Haley, he whispered. And you are underestimating mine, I said. I turned and walked out of the study. My legs were shaking, but my head was high. I went up to my room. I sat on the bed and exhaled. A long, shuddering breath. I had done it. I had created the choice architecture. He couldn't put the offer in writing because it was illegal. He couldn't force me to sign because I had refused. His only option now was to escalate, to try to break me publicly. He would try to do it at the GALA. He would try to ambush me on stage, use the pressure of the crowd to force me into submission. He thought the GALA was his stage. He didn't realize I was writing the script now. My phone pinged with an email notification. I picked it up. It was from an unknown sender, a string of random numbers and letters. There was no subject line, just a single sentence in the body of the email. He knows you opened it. Attached was a photo. It was a grainy, low-light picture taken from a security camera. It showed me, standing in front of Unit 12 at Briar Glen Self-Storage. The date stamp was from 3 nights ago. I stared at the image. The fear I had pushed down flared up again, sharp and cold. He had been watching, not just me, but the unit. He knew I had the boxes. He knew I had the gun. But he hadn't come for me yet. Why? Because he didn't know what I had found. He knew I had opened the box, but he didn't know if I had cracked the code. He was waiting to see if I would play my hand. I looked at the photo, and then I looked at my reflection in the dark window. He knows you opened it. Good. I thought, let him sweat. I typed a reply. My fingers steady. I know. I hit send. The game was over. The war had begun. The apartment Mara Klein secured for me was in a converted mill building on the south side of Briar Glen, a neighborhood my father referred to as transitional, to me. It was a fortress. The lease was under a limited liability company Mara had set up years ago for privacy, so my name appeared on no mailboxes and no directories. I packed only what I could carry in 3 duffel bags. I left the navy dress Celeste had bought me hanging in the closet of the estate. A ghost of the daughter they wanted me to be. When I locked the door of the new apartment behind me, the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of the Morris estate, where every room felt like a stage set. This silence was hollow and clean. It smelled of fresh paint and floor wax. I sat on the floor, my back against the door, and sent the email I had drafted with Mara. To Grant Morris. From Haley Morris. Subject: Residency and communication, Dad. I have moved out of the house to focus on my own well-being. Effective immediately. I will not be answering phone calls or attending informal meetings. Any communication regarding the estate, the trust, or the Harrowell Foundation must be in writing or conducted with legal counsel present. Do not attempt to visit me. Haley. I hit send. I felt a phantom vibration in my hand, an expectation of his immediate explosion. But I turned my phone off. I wasn't his audience anymore. The next morning, I met Noah Vance at a diner near the highway. I showed him the photo of the storage unit sent from the anonymous address. Noah studied the image on my laptop screen, zooming in on the grain. The angle is high, he said. Security camera. But look at the timestamp. It was in the bottom right corner. Camera 04, XT. He has access to the facility's feed, Noah said, or he paid someone who does. He looked at the email header. I have seen this syntax before, Noah said, tapping the screen. The subject line is blank. The body is a single sentence, no signature. When I was investigating Harrowell, my editor got 3 emails like this. One said, "We know where your daughter goes to school." Another said, "The lawsuit is already drafted. It is a template." I said, "It is a protocol." Noah corrected, "This isn't Grant sitting at his computer at midnight in a rage. This is someone whose job it is to make problems go away. Grant has a fixer. Haley, someone inside the organization who handles the dirty work so Grant's hands stay clean. Do you know who?" Noah shook his head. "I never found out. But be careful. If they are watching the storage unit, they are watching the house. It is good you moved." I went back to the apartment where Priya was already working. She had taped large sheets of butcher paper to the living room wall. She was drawing a map with a red marker. It was a diagram of theft. "Here is the donation flow," Priya said, pointing to a green box labeled Harrowell Trust. "Money comes in from the GALA, from the annual drive, from corporate sponsors. It sits in the operating account for about 30 days. Then what? Then it fractures," Priya said. She drew 3 lines branching out. About 60% goes to legitimate programs, scholarships, school supplies, the stuff they put in the brochures. That is the cover. And the rest? The rest goes to the Shell Loop, Ridgeway, Community Impact Workshops, and 2 new ones I found last night, Apex Consulting and Greenleaf Logistics. "Where does it end up?" I asked. Priya pointed to a large black box at the bottom of the map. "Renfield Development Holdings." I looked into Renfield. Priya said, "They have been buying up distressed properties in the North End. Old row houses. They renovate them using consulting fees paid by the charity, and then they rent them out at luxury prices. He is gentrifying the neighborhood with money meant to help the people he is evicting." I said, "Exactly." Priya said, "And here's the kicker. The renovations? They are billed as community improvement projects in the Harrowell ledger. He is claiming he is fixing up the neighborhood for the poor, while he is actually flipping the assets for himself. It was brilliant, and it was evil." That afternoon, Mara Klein fired the first legal shot. She sent a formal notice of trustee authority to the bank holding my mother's protected assets. With a copy delivered by courier to Grant, the notice was simple. It alerted the bank that I, Haley Morris, was the sole controlling trustee, and that no lines of credit secured by the trust assets could be renewed without my wet ink signature. Grant received it at 2 in the afternoon. At 2:15, he called me. I let it go to voicemail. He called again, and again, 6 times in 10 minutes. Finally, I picked up. I put the phone on speaker and set my own recording device next to it. "This is Haley," I said. "Haley. Oh God. Haley." His voice was wet, thick with tears. I had never heard him cry like this. It sounded guttural, broken. "Dad, what are you doing?" he sobbed. "Why are you doing this to us? I am your father. I love you. We are a family." I stared at the phone. It was terrifyingly convincing. If I hadn't seen the ledger, if I hadn't read my mother's unsent texts, I would have caved. "The bank just called me." He wept. "They are freezing the credit line. Haley, we have payroll on Friday. Good people are going to lose their jobs. The GALA is in 3 days. You are going to destroy your mother's legacy." "My mother's legacy is safe," I said, my voice steady. "The trust is safe." "You are killing me," he whispered. "I can't take this pressure. I am grieving her too. Why do you want to hurt me? I am not trying to hurt you. Dad, I am following the instructions in the will." "Instructions?" he shouted, the sob vanishing instantly, replaced by a razor-sharp rage. "You are following the instructions of a paranoid woman and a bitter lawyer. You are stupid. Haley, you are a stupid, ungrateful girl who thinks she is playing business." The switch was so fast it gave me whiplash. The grief was a performance. The rage was the reality. "If you do not rescind that notice by 5 o'clock, he hissed, "I will ruin you. I will have you declared incompetent before the sun goes down. I will tell the world you are off your medication. I will tell them you are a danger to yourself. I am recording this call." "Dad," I said. There was a silence on the line, a heavy, breathing silence. "Good," he said, his voice dropping to a low, cold register. "Record it. Play it for the judge. Let him hear how a father tries to reason with a mentally unstable daughter." He hung up. I sat there, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. He was scared. The threat about the bank freezing the credit line, that was real. He needed the liquidity to cover the holes he had dug. An hour later, my phone buzzed again. It was Celeste. "Haley, please, can we meet? Just us. No Grant. I am scared." I agreed to meet her at a tea shop in the financial district, a place too public for a scene. Celeste looked 10 years older than she had 2 days ago. Her makeup was perfect, but her eyes were rimmed with red. She ordered a chamomile tea and wrapped her hands around the cup as if freezing. "He is tearing the house apart," she said quietly. "He threw a vase against the wall after he got off the phone with you. I am sorry you have to deal with that." I said, "Haley, I didn't know," she said, looking up at me with wide, pleading eyes. "I didn't know about the money. I just sign where he tells me to sign. I thought he was a genius." "You are an intelligent woman." "Celeste," I said, "you witnessed the Ridgeway contract. You knew the workshops were fake." "I didn't know they were fake," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I thought they were rescheduled. I just wanted to help." She reached across the table and touched my hand. Her palm was clammy. "He is going to crash. Haley. I can feel it, and I have my own expenses. I have a life. If he goes down, I can't go down with him. I was just the girlfriend. I wasn't a partner. You know that, right?" She was negotiating her immunity. She was offering me her loyalty in exchange for a lifeboat. "If you want to prove you were just the girlfriend," I said, withdrawing my hand, "you need to start remembering things." "What things?" "Dates, times, conversations where he told you to lie. If you testify, Celeste, if you tell the truth about the signatures you witnessed, it might help your case." She stared at me, calculating. She took a sip of tea. "I have a diary," she whispered. "I write down his moods, to protect myself." "Keep writing," I said. She nodded, looking away. I realized then that Grant had no allies, only dependents, and dependents turn into predators when the food runs out. I left Celeste and went to meet Lena Corbett again. Lena had texted me saying she remembered something else. We met in the park again. Lena looked less frightened this time, more determined. "I was thinking about your mom," Lena said. About the money she gave me. The $5,000? Yes. But it wasn't just the money. She gave me a card, a business card for a recruiter in Boston. She told me, "Call this number. Tell him Elena sent you. He will get you a job where Grant can't reach you." Did you call it? I did. That is how I got my job at the hospital. But Haley, I wasn't the only one. What do you mean? 2 years ago, I ran into another woman who used to work in accounting at Harrowell. She got fired after she asked about the Renfield invoices. She told me your mom did the same thing for her, gave her cash, gave her a contact, helped her move. I stared at Lena. She was running an underground railroad. I said, she was getting people out. Lena agreed. She couldn't leave herself. Maybe because of you. Or maybe because he had too much on her. But she was saving the staff. She was paying severance packages out of her own pocket to keep people from suing. Yes, but also to get them to safety. My mother hadn't been a passive victim. She had been a covert operative behind enemy lines. She had been using her allowance to dismantle his power structure, one employee at a time. I felt a fierce, burning pride. I wasn't just fighting for her memory, I was joining her army. The next day, I went to the Harrowell headquarters. I walked in through the front doors, head high. The receptionist looked startled but didn't stop me. I went to the break room. I knew the board treasurer, Mr. Henderson, usually got coffee at 10. He walked in at 10:05. He looked pale. He froze when he saw me. "Haley," he stammered. "I thought Grant said you were taking time off." "Grant says a lot of things," I said pleasantly. "Actually, Mr. Henderson, I was hoping we could clear up a small confusion. I was looking at the Ridgeway invoices." Henderson dropped his sweetener packet. "I do not handle the vendor details," he said, backing away. "But you signed the checks, didn't you? Or did you? Because the bylaws say you have to sign anything over 10,000. These were 9,950. I didn't sign them," he whispered. Looking at the door, Grant said it was more efficient to handle the small stuff himself. "Small stuff?" I asked. "It adds up to $300,000 a year." Henderson looked like he was going to be sick. "I have to go." He said, "I have a meeting." He practically ran out of the room. I didn't need him to confess. His panic was enough. I went straight to Grant's office. I didn't knock. Grant was on the phone. He slammed the receiver down when I entered. "You have some nerve," he said. "I want a meeting." I said, "With you and Mr. Henderson, right now." "Why?" "Because I'm confused about the compliance reports," I said, keeping my voice loud enough that the secretary outside could hear. "And as a potential trustee, I have a duty to understand the flow of funds. Unless you have something to hide?" Grant stood up. His face was purple. "Get Henderson in here." He barked at his intercom. Henderson arrived 2 minutes later, looking like a man walking to the gallows. "Sit down," Grant commanded. Henderson sat. I remained standing. I have a recording app running on my phone in my pocket. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "did you authorize the payments to Ridgeway Civic Solutions?" Grant cut in. Of course he authorized them. It was a standard consulting arrangement. I asked Mr. Henderson. I said, I was aware of them. Henderson squeaked. "And the deliverables?" I asked. "What did Ridgeway actually do?" "They provided strategic oversight for the community workshops." Grant said quickly, "They handled the logistics, the venue bookings, the curriculum. So they organized the workshops that Lena Corbett says never happened?" I asked. Grant froze. Lena Corbett was a disgruntled employee who was fired for incompetence. Grant said, his voice hard. "She lied." "Okay," I said. "So Ridgeway organized the workshops. But I checked the dates. The payments to Ridgeway continued for 6 months after the workshop program was allegedly canceled. Why were we paying for logistics for events that weren't even on the calendar?" Grant glared at Henderson. "Explain it to her." "Arthur, well," Henderson stammered. "Sometimes there are tail fees, administrative wrap-up costs. For 6 months?" I asked. "At exactly $9,950 a week? That is a very consistent wrap-up cost. It was a retainer," Grant shouted. slamming his hand on the desk. "We kept them on retainer in case we restarted the program." Jesus. Haley, do you not understand how business works? You pay to keep talent available. So we paid $300,000 to keep a mailbox rental store available? I asked. A what? Henderson asked, looking confused. Ridgeway is a mailbox. I said, I visited the address. It is closed. Grant stood up. Get out. I'm just asking questions. Dad, I said get out. You are disrupting the operations of this organization. I looked at Henderson. If I were you, Mr. Henderson, I would check your liability insurance. I turned and walked out. I had what I needed, Grant had claimed, on record, that the money was a retainer for a company that didn't exist, contradicting his earlier claim that it was for logistics, and Henderson had admitted he didn't sign the checks. I sent the recording to Priya immediately. That night, Priya came to the apartment with a bottle of cheap wine and a grim expression. We found something else, she said. Worse than the real estate? Different. She said, I was looking at the vendor contracts for the gala, the catering, the venue, the AV. There is a clause in the contract for the event planner, a company called Apex Consulting. Another shell? Yes, but look where the money goes. She pulled up a bank transfer record. Apex Consulting pays a monthly fee to Sterling. Hearth Moore. Who are they? Top-tier criminal defense firm in Boston. Priya said, they specialize in white-collar crime. I stared at the screen. He has been paying a criminal defense lawyer? For 3 years. Priya said, he calls it success bonuses in the charity ledger. But he is funneling the money to a retainer. He has been prepaying his own defense fund with stolen charity money. He knew. I whispered. He knew he was going to get caught eventually. He was betting on it. Priya said, he is not just a thief. Haley, he is a pessimist. He knows what he is doing is illegal, and he has been forcing the donors to pay for his inevitable trial. It was the final piece of the puzzle. It proved intent beyond any shadow of a doubt. He wasn't accidental. He wasn't sloppy. He was calculating. The gala was 2 days away. I was sitting at my table, drafting the speech I would never be allowed to give, when my phone pinged with a notification from the Harrowell website. Grant had posted a new blog entry, a tribute to Elena, carrying the light forward. I clicked on it. It was a photo of my mother, looking radiant, and next to her, a photo of me, a terrible photo from the funeral, where I looked pale, disheveled, and lost. The text read, As we approach our annual gala, my heart is heavy but full. Elena was the rock of this family. She supported me, and she supported our daughter, Haley, through her many struggles. Elena always believed that even the most lost souls could be guided back to the path. In her honor, we are launching the Legacy Scholarship to help young people who, like our dear Haley, have struggled to find their footing in the academic world. We ask for your prayers and support as Haley joins me on stage this Saturday, taking her first brave steps back into the light. I read it twice. He was framing me. He was telling the world I was a lost soul, a failure, a charity case. He was using the scholarship not just to launder money, but to publicly brand me as incompetent. If I spoke up at the gala, he would look at the audience with sad eyes and say, See? She is struggling. She is having an episode. He was inoculating the audience against the truth. I felt a cold rage settle in my bones. It was sharper than before. It wasn't just anger. It was clarity. He thought he was controlling the narrative. He thought he was the only storyteller in the room. I picked up my phone. I texted Noah Vance. Get me a ticket for the journalist section at the gala. Do not let Grant know. Then I texted Mara. Bring the full file to the gala. The hard copies. And finally, I texted Celeste. I saw the post. He is really pushing the supportive father angle, isn't he? Make sure he is standing near the microphone when I come up. I want everyone to hear what he says. I stood up and walked to the closet. I looked at the empty space where the pink dress should have been. I wasn't going to wear pink. I went to my bag and pulled out the only suit I owned, a black blazer and trousers I used for job interviews. It was severe. It was sharp. It looked like armor. He wanted a lost soul? He was going to get a prosecutor. The Larkridge Conservatory was a cathedral of glass and steel. A monument to transparency built by people who had everything to hide. The gala was in full swing by the time I arrived. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roast duck, and the sharp, metallic tang of anxiety. I walked up the limestone steps alone. I wasn't wearing the pale pink dress Celeste had bought for me, the one meant to turn me into a ghost. I was wearing my black suit. It was severe, tailored, and absorbed the light rather than reflecting it. I had pulled my hair back into a tight, low bun. I wore no jewelry. I looked less like a donor and more like an auditor. Mara Klein and Priya Haldane were already inside. Standing near the bar, they didn't wave. We exchanged a single, sharp nod. They had the hard copies of the evidence in their bags. The Ridgway ledgers, the forged medical forms, the flowchart of the money laundering scheme. They were my insurance. If Grant tried to have security remove me, they would hand the files to the board chairman before I reached the exit. I found my assigned seat. It was at the head table. Of course, Grant wanted me on display. When I approached the table, Grant was already seated, holding court with the mayor and his wife. He looked up, and for a split second, his smile faltered. He scanned my black suit, his eyes narrowing. He had expected the pink dress. He had expected submission, but he recovered quickly. "Haley," he said, standing to kiss my cheek. His lips were cold. "You look serious tonight. I thought it appropriate." I said, "It is a serious occasion." He squeezed my shoulder, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "Just remember the plan," he whispered in my ear. "Smile, look grateful, and when I call you up, just stand there. Do not say a word. I will do the talking." I pulled away. "I will do my best. Dad." The dinner was an exercise in endurance. I sat silently as the waiters cleared the soup and served the main course. I watched the room. I wasn't looking for friends. I was looking for leverage. I saw Mr. Henderson, the treasurer, sitting 3 tables away. He was sweating, wiping his forehead with a napkin every few minutes. He hadn't touched his wine. He knew I knew. I saw Celeste, sitting on Grant's other side. She caught my eye and quickly looked down at her plate. She was terrified. She was waiting to see which way the building would fall so she could run out the right door. And I saw Noah Vance standing in the back of the room, near the press risers. He gave me a subtle thumbs up. He had his recorder running. Grant stood up as the dessert was served. The room went silent. The lights dimmed, leaving a spotlight on the podium. Grant walked to the microphone. He looked magnificent. He was the picture of the benevolent patriarch, the man who built schools and saved neighborhoods. "Thank you all for coming," he began, his voice rich and warm. "Tonight is about the future, but it is also about the past. It is about the values we leave behind." He paused, looking out over the crowd. "We live in a world where some people think education is optional," he said, a sad smile playing on his lips. "They think they can drift through life without discipline, without rigor. They think the world owes them a living just because they showed up." A ripple of agreement went through the room. "But we know better," Grant said. "We know that worth has to be earned. It has to be built. Brick by brick. My late wife, Elena, knew this. She was a woman of quiet strength. She knew that supporting a vision was just as important as having one." He turned to look at me. The spotlight swung, blinding me for a moment. "And even my daughter, Haley, is learning this lesson," Grant said. He gestured for me to stand. I stood up. The applause was polite, pitying. "Haley has had a difficult path," Grant continued, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "She has struggled to find her footing. She has stumbled. But she is here tonight because she understands that family is about second chances. She knows that without guidance, a life can go off the rails." I stood perfectly still. I let the insults wash over me. Struggled, stumbled, guidance. He was painting me as a broken thing that he had graciously decided to fix. "Tonight," Grant said, his voice rising, "I am honoring Elena's memory by doing what she would have wanted. I am announcing the creation of the Elena Morris Legacy Scholarship." The applause grew louder. "This scholarship will be fully funded by the Morris family estate," Grant said, "and I, as the permanent steward of Elena's assets, will ensure that every dollar goes to students who have the discipline that my daughter is now learning to embrace." He held out his hand. "Haley, come up here. Stand with me as we make this pledge." This was it. The trap. If I went up there and stood silently while he claimed stewardship of the assets, I was complicit. I was endorsing the lie. I walked up the stairs to the stage. My heels clicked on the wood floor. The sound was sharp, rhythmic, inevitable. Grant moved to the side, making room for me at the podium, but he kept his hand on the microphone. He expected me to stand next to him, a prop in his play. I stepped up to the podium, and then I reached out and took the microphone from his hand. He was so surprised he let go. He stared at me, his eyes wide. He took a half step forward, as if to grab it back, but stopped. There were 300 people watching. He couldn't wrestle his daughter for a microphone on stage. I looked out at the audience. I saw the faces of the donors, the board members, the people who had believed his story for 20 years. "Thank you, Dad," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. It didn't pitch up. It sounded like my mother's voice, but stronger. I turned to the audience. "My father is right about one thing," I said. "Worth has to be earned, and truth has to be told." I saw Grant stiffen. He took a step closer to me, his smile fixed, his teeth gritted. "Haley," he hissed under his breath, "give me the mic." I ignored him. "First, I want to correct a small detail," I said. "My father mentioned I stumbled in my education. Actually, I didn't drop out of my nursing program. I transferred to literature because I wanted to be a writer, and I didn't fail to finish. My funding was cut off without notice." A murmur went through the room. Grant's smile was gone. "But more importantly," I said, "I need to clarify the structure of this new scholarship. While the sentiment is beautiful, the announcement is premature." I looked directly at Mr. Henderson in the audience. "The assets my father intends to use for this scholarship are held in a protected testamentary trust." I said, "My mother, Elena Morris, set up this trust specifically to ensure that her money would be used according to her strict ethical standards." I paused. The room was deadly silent. "As of last week," I continued, "I am the sole controlling trustee and beneficiary of that trust. My father has no legal authority to pledge these assets, to distribute them, or to claim stewardship over them." Grant lunged forward. He grabbed my arm. "That is enough," he said, his voice tight and loud enough for the front row to hear. "She is not well. She is confused." I didn't pull away. I looked at his hand on my arm. Then I looked at his face. "I am not confused, Dad," I said into the microphone, "and I am not unstable." I turned back to the crowd. "I have spent the last 2 weeks reviewing the financial records of the Harrowell Learning Trust," I said. "I have found significant irregularities. Specifically, I have found a pattern of payments to a vendor called Ridgeway Civic Solutions." Grant's face went white. He released my arm as if burned. "Ridgeway Civic Solutions has received over $300,000 in the last year." I said, "These payments were structured in amounts of $9,950, $50 below the mandatory federal reporting limit." I saw Mr. Henderson put his head in his hands. "I visited the address for Ridgeway." I continued, "It is a closed mailbox rental store. There is no consultancy. There are no services. The money, however, has been traced to a property holding company called Renfield Development, which is majority owned by Grant Morris." The room erupted. It wasn't applause this time. It was a gasp, a wave of shock that rolled through the hall. Grant grabbed the lectern. "This is a lie," he shouted, forgetting the microphone, forgetting the image. "She is lying. She is off her medication. She is trying to hurt me because of her grief. I turned to him. I was calm. I was the only calm person in the room, if I am lying. Dad, why did you ask me 3 days ago to sign a retroactive waiver for those payments? Why did you offer me a monthly stipend in exchange for my silence? I didn't, he screamed. I have the date. I said, Tuesday, 2:15 p.m. You called me. You threatened to have me declared incompetent if I didn't release the collateral for your line of credit. I have the call logs. I have the lack of written documentation for any of these requests. I looked at the board members at Table 1. I have initiated an independent forensic audit of the trust. I announced, until that audit is complete, I am freezing the collateral assets in my mother's trust. No new donations should be accepted, and I suggest the board look very closely at the vendor contracts for Apex Consulting as well. Apex Consulting, the Legal Defense Fund. Grant looked like he had been shot. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He realized, finally, that I knew everything. I knew about the real estate. I knew about the legal fund. I knew about the years of theft. He tried to laugh. It was a high, desperate sound. You are uneducated, he sputtered. You do not understand how these things work. You are a girl who sells used books. You think you can walk in here and lecture us on finance? I didn't raise my voice. I may not have your degree. Dad, I said, but I know how to read. And I know that when a charity pays a criminal defense firm a monthly retainer under a false name, it means the founder knows he is a criminal. That was the nail in the coffin. A man in a tuxedo, the chairman of the board, stood up. He walked briskly to the stage. Grant, he said, his voice low and furious. We need to speak. Now. Grant looked at the chairman. He looked at the donors, who were whispering frantically. He looked at me. You did this, he whispered. You ungrateful little. The chairman stepped between us. Off stage. Grant, now. Grant was led off the stage. He looked small. He looked deflated. The giant of industry, the architect of generosity, was just a thief in a nice suit. I placed the microphone back on the lectern. Thank you, I said to the stunned room. Enjoy your dinner. I walked down the stairs. My legs were shaking now, but I didn't let it show. I walked straight to Mara and Priya. Did we get it? I asked. Priya held up her phone. Every word, she said. Noah Vance was waiting by the exit. He looked like he had just won the lottery. That was efficient, he said. It was necessary. I said. The board chairman came out of the back room. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. Ms. Morris, he said, the board would like to speak with you. Immediately. I checked my watch. I am tired. I said, my lawyer, Ms. Klein, has the files. She can walk you through the evidence. But Grant? The chairman stammered. He is saying, Grant is your problem now. I said, I signaled to Mara. She stepped forward, handing the thick file to the chairman. Here are the ledgers, Mara said, and the authorized signatures, or lack thereof. We will be in touch regarding the asset freeze. I walked out of the conservatory. The night air was cold and clean. I took a deep breath. For the first time in 33 years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for permission to breathe. Grant caught up to me on the sidewalk. He had broken away from the board members. His tie was crooked. His face was flushed. Haley, he shouted. I stopped. I turned around. Mara and Priya stepped closer to me, flanking me like guards. You ruined me, he said, his voice trembling. You ruined everything. Do you have any idea what you have done? I stopped a crime. Dad, I said. It was my money, he screamed. I earned it. I built this. You are nothing without me. You are worthless. I looked at him, really looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, the desperate need to be the biggest person in the room. He wasn't a monster. He was a pathetic, small man who had spent his life bullying women because he was terrified of being average. I am not worthless. I said, and I am not yours. I stepped closer to him. Here is your choice, I said, and this is the only offer you are going to get. He stared at me, panting. You can resign. I said, Tonight, you can cite health reasons. You can cooperate with the audit. You can pay back every cent you stole from the sale of the Renfield properties. If you do that, I will not press charges for the identity fraud on my student loans. His eyes went wide. But if you fight me, I continued, if you file one more motion about my mental health, or if you try to spin this in the press, I will give no avance the entire file, the forged signatures, the medical coercion, the anonymous emails. I will put you in prison, Dad, and I will sleep like a baby while you are there. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He looked at the conservatory, where his empire was crumbling, and then back at me. Why? He whispered. Why didn't you just take the money I offered? Because Mom told me not to. I said. I turned and walked away. I heard him call my name one last time, a weak, broken sound, but I didn't look back. I walked to my car. I got in. I sat in the driver's seat and looked at the passenger seat. It was empty. My mother wasn't there. But she was. She was in the silence. She was in the clarity. She was in the fact that I had finally, after all these years, finished the story she started. I started the engine. I didn't know where I was going next. I didn't know what I would do for a living now that the trust was frozen and my family was imploding. But I knew one thing. I was Haley Morris. I was educated. I was worthy. And I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story. It was a journey of uncovering truth and finding self-worth, and I hope it resonated with you. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to Revenge Stories for more. Share your thoughts in English in the comments. I read every single one. See you in the next story.